Hey everyone, welcome to tonight's late night happy hour / Lando Lakers live crossover episode. It's draft night. The NBA still a percolating, Andy, I think to say the very least. The craziest of crazy deals didn't happen Wednesday night, but still plenty of stuff to talk about coming out of draft night. There's some interesting stuff going on around the league, to say the least.
I mean, there's some interesting stuff in terms of teams reshaping themselves. I think most notably the Sixers, but also the Timberwolves did some interesting stuff tonight. There's also the negative story of teams potentially being reshaped with Klay Thompson's injury today that we're waiting to find out the final word on, but the early
doesn't sound good.
Yeah, I was going to say the early reports do not seem positive. Obviously, hoping the best for Klay. We've worked with Michael Thompson for years. I feel horrible for the whole family given everything that Klay has been through. So hopefully there will be a pleasant surprise when Klay undergoes an MRI in Los Angeles. But just really crappy news on that front.
Yeah, so a lot to cover on tonight's show, of course. Also podcasting this one out with the Lando Lakers podcast. That means, of course, that it's brought to you by the folks at betonline.ag. Andy, NFL season in full swing. You might not be at the game this year, but you can still be in on the action at betonline.ag. Monday night, Rams going to Tampa. That's actually going to be kind of a fun game. I'm very curious to see if my friend Jared Goff can respond to a very fearsome Tampa defense. I am skeptical. I don't know what the line is, but I might have to take the Bucs there. You've been very dedicated taking the Rams.
I'm actually approaching this game from a very different standpoint that could affect it does affect gambling in some respect, because the fantasy league that we're in, it is like any fantasy league.
It is gambling.
Yes, it's for money. And I need to find out if Chris Godwin is going to be getting the Jalen Ramsey treatment, because anybody that gets shadowed by Jalen Ramsey, the ball never goes near him.
Well, if there's a line on that, it'll be at betonline.ag.
Yes.
So head on to betonline.ag today and take advantage of all the great sign-up bonuses. Again, that's betonline.ag. Sign up today. BetOnline, your sportsbook experts. Lando Lakers podcast, of course, always brought to you by the great folks at Delicious Pizza. 2 locations, West Adams and in Hollywood up on Sunset. 20% off when you tell them the Cam Brothers sent you, whether you're ordering it online or calling it in. Great pizza, great local business that you're supporting, and big Lakers fan too. So
yes,
get out there and order the delicious pizza. All right, so there is some Lakers news too that we're going to get to. Ramona Shelburne from ESPN was on today on Mason and Ireland on 710 ESPN in LA, talking a little bit about the free agents or potential free agents, JaVale McGee, Avery Bradley, and Dwight Howard. So we're definitely going to we'll start that. We'll get to that, I should say. But you mentioned it, Andy. The biggest news in the Western Conference today isn't James Harden or Russell Westbrook or those trades or anything that happened. It's Klay Thompson. Yeah. And what this means for the Pacific, what this means for the West, and all that stuff. A potentially game-changing, season-shifting injury today with Klay at this pickup game, at UCLA. I think it was at UCLA, but in LA. Like, this is awful news for the Warriors.
Yeah, I mean, you think about tonight with the draft and the Warriors, they end up taking James Wiseman, the big man at number 2, which a lot of people had expected was going to be the case if Golden State kept their pick. But you didn't know if they were going to keep their pick, because this is a team in definitive win now mode. And I think they were looking to try to, run back that championship core that they've had for years, hope that Andrew Wiggins would blend in well with, a very long off season for these guys to work out and stuff like that. And that being the case, maybe the Warriors would end up trading that pick, or what do they do with their $17 million trade exception that they got from the Andre Iguodala deal? Like, all of these different questions and, potentials and stuff when it comes to the Warriors, and by extension, the entire Western Conference. they all got thrown for a loop with Clay's injury,
Yeah.
but also with no time to think about.
I was about to say, like, I don't, like, there is, Woj was talking after the draft that there was some. It was one of these things, like, how like when the person delivering the report knows stuff or has heard things but has to be really careful about how they say the thing that they know, because they can't fully say everything. That's what I got. That's the impression I got from Woj on ESPN as he was talking about the Clay injury following, the draft, doing the analysis, like, where there is some hope in Golden State that it's not catastrophe. I think it was Chris Haynes at Yahoo reported that, that there's concern that it might be an Achilles injury. It is the other leg from the ACL tear from last year. So it's the other one, so it's not definitionally the same injury as last. So, but nobody seems to think like he could be, 3 weeks, but he'll be ready for camp. It's not that kind of injury, because quite frankly, you don't get the sort of reporting of, blank has a lower body injury in a pickup game for somebody who turns an ankle and will be ready in a month.
Well,
that just doesn't happen that way.
I mean, forget just the type of reporting. You see the reaction from all these different players around the league, with prayers up and the prayer hands.
Right.
Emojis.
So those guys clearly,
right.
You get the impression may know something.
Right. You're not doing that for, like you said, an ankle sprain. Like this is guys around the league at minimum under the impression that this is a really big deal for Clay. And Clay, everyone knows how great he is. He's got a lot of respect around the league, and nobody wants to see this happen to a guy that already is coming off a missed season.
Yeah. And so, like, look, when we talk about the conference this year, we've had Sam Esfandiari on, we've had Anthony Slater on, we've had a bunch of people on that are tied to that market and tied to that team. And we talk about the Warriors a lot because you can't, it's easy to forget them because they were so bad last year, but they jump, with a healthy Clay, healthy Steph, Draymond back, and their payroll and all these other things that they jump right back into the upper echelon of the West if everyone's healthy. Now, so you add them to the Clippers, you add them to the Lakers, and you have this thing. Still, maybe a little bit more of an unknown quantity than both the Lakers and Clippers, because, everybody's a little bit older. We don't know what it looks like when guys come back, and they have some holes to fill, but there's still those guys. If Clay can't play, if he's not available, for a playoff run or something like that, if he misses the first couple months of the season and then he can come back in the playoffs and whatever, now it's a different conversation. But if he really can't play, the entire dynamic of the Western Conference completely changes. We're back to the group sort of that we had last year, with Oklahoma City dropping out and maybe a few more openings, with, maybe Houston backtracking if they make those trades with their superstars or whatever it is.
Or if everybody on that team just despises each other.
Or whatever it might be. But all of a sudden, the field at the top of the conference, that upper echelon group is back down to basically being the Lakers and Clippers and maybe Denver, if you want to put them in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, I was thinking about this actually, Brian, Sunday of all days, because you and I
it's the Lord's Day.
Because it's the Lord's Day, and as somebody who has not stepped inside a temple in a good 25 years, that's where I do my reflection on the Lord's Day, just on my own time, often with football playing. But that particular day,
that's a very, very reformed synagogue.
I was told that God is everywhere, which leads me to believe he is in my living room.
If you believe Jordan Rodriguez, our friend at The Athletic, God is at SoFi Stadium putting red zone on the Oculus before games start. Well, I mean, that is apparently where everyone says God lives on Sundays, because it's that spectacular.
And what I am actually asking for from God in this particular case is just, it's a light lift. Leave me alone during football. You and I will find spirituality, on our own time. But anyway, we got our kids together at the park on Sunday, and you and I were just talking a little bit about the NBA and sort of like the teams that were expected to be in the playoffs. And it kind of dawned on me that the Warriors, I get why everybody would have expected them full strength to be in the playoffs, and it makes sense. And I thought of them as a playoff team too. But a lot of people had them in that upper echelon, like somewhere between a 4 and 1 seed. And there's been a part of me a little bit hesitant, just like, okay, you know what? These guys haven't played together in a while. We haven't seen, at the time, Clay to this point. Like, it felt a little bit ambitious to just automatically assume that they would be exactly where they had left off before the bottom fell out with a lot of injuries. And, again, I'm not saying that I think that things were already falling apart for them, but it was a reminder that we really didn't know exactly what they were. And I think there may have been a little bit of presumptions anyway, but it's just a reminder that right now, I mean, just it's everything can be in flux just at the drop of a hat. And it's crazy to see. It's sad to see with Clay, if he ends up missing 2-ish seasons. And then, like you said, you just wonder what happens with this team.
Yeah.
And then by
look,
the rest of the way.
I get it from, I don't even, Lakers fans don't want Klay Thompson to be hurt. They don't want Steph to be hurt. They want, like, basketball fans, though, don't want it either. Like, the Warriors are fun. They are good for basketball. They are, and like, you want good competition. It just sucks. Like, you get the promise of, we didn't get to, like, I want to see the Lakers and a good Warriors team play each other. Like, I want that. Like, as a basketball fan, I want to see those things. And, Clay is not an old guy. That's not what I mean, but there's still the,
he's not young.
He's not right, but he's not 38 is what I'm saying. He's 31, 30, something like that. He's in that general area. But the point is, you miss a season with a big injury on one leg. And again, we don't know yet what this is, but the concern is that it could be another long injury on the other leg. You wonder,
the speculation is that it's Achilles.
Right. Again, I think that's what Chris Haynes put out.
Right. Again, to make this very clear, this is speculation, but that seems to be what a lot of people are at minimum concerned.
So you wonder, like, you worry about, what a guy comes back as. Like, we had this conversation about Cam Newton the other night. It's like, at some point, different sports, apples, oranges, I get it. At some point, the physical pileup starts to become an issue. And so you hope it isn't like that. You hope it isn't like that with Clay. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it, but other than, like, this was the most consequential thing that happened in the Western Conference today.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's close.
And also, too, I mean, like we were saying before, the Warriors are going to have to make some really big decisions really quickly.
Yes.
They have to decide about their exception. They have to figure out what they're going to do with free agency. Like, there is a lot that they need to figure out. And who knows if they'll have all the information that they need at the time when they have to figure it out.
Yeah. So other things that happened around the conference today, and again, we're going to get to the Lakers, sort of the implications of some things that came out today about some of their potential free agents here in a minute. But other stuff that happened around the conference, Clippers made an interesting deal. They traded Landry Shamet for Luke Kennard, essentially trading a shorter guard version of a shooter for a slightly taller, small forwardish, a little bigger 2-3. I think Kennard's a slightly better player than Shamet, but I could be convinced otherwise, the other way. You pointed this out when we were kind of talking about stuff earlier, Andy. It's been so long since anybody saw the Pistons play. And I think Kennard was hurt last year and missed some time. So that kind of makes it a little hard. I have no idea. But that's not a revolutionary trade for them. Dallas, I thought, made a nice trade where they gave up Seth Curry, which hurts their shooting, but they get some defense in Josh Richardson. That's one of those deals I think that
And
makes
some
sense
good
for
scoring.
both teams.
Josh Richardson, as a third, fourth
That's
scorer.
Philly, by the way, for people who didn't know where that came from. Seth Curry to Philly for Josh Richardson.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting deal for Dallas, but it definitely gives them some athleticism, some defense. I don't think it hurts their shooting a little bit, but that wasn't really a problem.
No,
And
they had no trouble scoring. They had a lot of trouble defending.
exactly. So and for Philadelphia, over the course of about like 6 hours, they went from a team with no shooting to a team that all of a sudden can shoot. So
because they got Danny Green. They
Yeah.
Sam Presti, who I believe it was John Gonzalez at the Ringer, noted today might be a witch and should be dunked in the nearest body of water for confirmation. Already, like the supposition when they got Danny Green from the Lakers and the Schroeder thing, which we talked about on Sunday, we kind of went through the Schroeder trade, which is official now. The Lakers sent out the press release on that. Was that Presti would eventually flip that for some sort of asset, maybe a first round or whatever. It took him like 4 hours to turn Danny Green into another first round pick. Now, I believe, and I am not making this up, I believe they are up to 17 first round picks.
That's the number I saw.
Between now and 2026. Like,
yes.
I think if you included today's draft, they had 17 first round. That feels a little bit like trolling because you're not going to use seven. Some of these are really good picks, and you're going to have to put, you're not going to draft all these guys. And you're going to have to trade them for something or whatever. But it is still pretty impressive. The how he's able to turn negative assets into these picks is kind of impressive.
Well, I mean, what it really does, and this is especially important in a market like OKC, Brian, where it's not exactly a free agent hotbed.
No.
Paul George has represented like the beginning and the end of the free agent rush to the Thunder. Like he's pretty much the whole damn thing. But what it gives you is options.
Correct.
And when you're a franchise in that type of market, options are lifeblood. Mm-hmm. Like the ability to have so many different avenues that you can go down by just virtue of having all of these assets. Obviously, Sam Presti has to do a great job either leveraging them or actually turning them into people and, players that are useful and
tangible human beings.
Yes. I mean, like, this is something that a guy like Danny Ainge, for example, has been made fun of over the years, like, just hoarding these assets.
Right. And never actually using them.
Right. And Sam Presti has that. I don't think the reputation to the same degree as Danny Ainge, just because contextually it's different doing it, I think, in Boston with the type of teams that they've had versus OKC. But Sam Presti is going to have tons and tons of options, and that matters.
I think so too. And here's the part, and like when we talked about the Schroeder deal for the Lakers, one of the things that is underrated about it, because and pick hoarding can be completely overrated. Like you point out, people on the chat are pointing it out. Like you can't just sit here and just look how many first. Like you have to turn it into stuff, but we underrate as sort of a basketball watching community the value of being able to find player 4 through 9 in your rotation, like at the 26th pick, the 25th pick, the 28th pick, the 17th pick, whatever it might be. And so for the Lakers, one of the downsides of the Schroeder trade is that they lose.
I believe it's their Schroeder deal.
They lose. He's sort of a German Rondo too, in the sense too that they're both a little bit weird and a little surly, which I kind of appreciate. You lose access. This was one of the only ways the Lakers had access to cheap young talent. So like you do lose something by not keeping that pick. I have no trouble. We've already approved of expressed our approval of the trade, but being able to find particularly for a team like the Lakers that's going to be capped out at some point, or they already are, but like, you just lose access. Being able to find that guy potentially is really valuable. And so for Presti, it's not just a matter of, can you trade all of those picks for a superstar one day? And that's obviously the hope. It's, can you use some of those picks either to go from 20, in 1 year where you have the 22nd and the 27th pick to the 16th pick and that guy becomes your sixth man or something that you can lean on, and you can find another avenue to that superstar. It's really developing the whole rotation. If you can lay out a foundation and then just plug in the star at the end on top of it, which is a little bit what the Clippers did with Kawhi and Paul George. They got the rest of the infrastructure and added the star. You can make noise and get good pretty quick.
Well, I mean, look,
and I think that's certainly what they're going to try to do.
I'm looking right now at their draft history, and they found Serge Ibaka with the 24th pick. They found Steven Adams with the 12th.
He was
pick.
late. Yeah, later.
You know, they trying to see if anybody else that stood out. I mean, they've found some solid guys. You know, like Abrinas was a early second round pick. He was solid for that position. You know, Reggie Jackson, 24. I mean, he's had a good career for a 24th pick. Like, they're actually, I think, very good at identifying talent. Or it seems like so far, if nothing else,
is difficult. It is difficult. I see that Victor Luong points out, you know, Presti's track record in drafts outside the top 10 is spotty. Everyone's track record outside the top 10 is spotty, because I think
actually one of the areas where the Lakers have basically crushed it for like the last 10 years.
There are teams, there are exceptions. The Lakers are absolutely that. You know, the Spurs are constantly finding, like, what people have to understand is, if you find a guy who can play in the NBA and be like a rotation player in the NBA, and you draft him at 24, even if he's ordinary, that's a huge win. Like, to find a guy who can stay. Like, I broke it down before the draft. Like, the Lakers drafting at 28, this is when they still had the pick. Like, the expectation, because it's the Lakers, is always they should be able to find somebody really good. And that's a reflection of how well they've drafted. It's not a reflection of what you usually get there. The only exception is the 27th pick. And I don't have the people in front of me. For some reason, 27 has been an oddly productive number in the draft. 26, 25, no. 28, no. 29 and 30, no. But 27, yes. If you go back and look at the 2010. So maybe that's the key. If you can find a guy who can even stay in the league for 5 or 6 or 7 years and be reasonably productive, that's a win.
Look,
late in the draft.
For all of the frustration that Laker fans sometimes feel with Kuzma, and I get it, because he can be a roller coaster, and there'll be times where it seems like he's turning a corner, a light bulb's going off, and it just doesn't stay bright. That dude is an absolute home run at that position. Like, they crushed that pick with Kuzma. Like, that's not even
for God's sake. Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
it becomes a different question when you have to decide if you want to pay him.
Right.
But I'm just saying, he's still a quality NBA player.
They found a guy who was a suitable rotation player for a championship team at 27. That is a fucking home run, and there's no way around it. It's really difficult to do. And I think you can never lose sight of just how hard that is.
Yeah, I mean, like, the Lakers, like, it is worth pointing out. Let me see if I can pull up my story here. They're really good at it. Like, really good at it. I got the article in front of me. So here's that's me.
Jordan Clarkson.
Oh wow, they made a really nice chart out of that. I didn't even notice.
Oh my God, stop admiring yourself and
I didn't. I'm trying to find the information. I'm admiring the people who did the layout.
Josh Hart, Ivica Zubac, Thomas Bryant, Mo Wagner. These are all really Nance.
Yeah.
These are
all, and then the guys they took high: Randall, Nance, Russell, Zubac, Ingram, Ball, Kuzma, Hart, Wagner. You go through Svi looks like he might play.
Yeah, I mean, you go through, for example, like Julius Randle's draft, and Randle is a very polarizing player, and there are times where, like we were saying with Kuzma, there are times where Randle seems like he's really taking steps forward, and then there's times where there seems to be a bit of a regression or a ceiling, and we've both been over the years high on Randle, but either way, you look at his draft class. There's nobody within 5 picks of him that the Lakers should have taken instead of him.
Yeah, correct. I mean, you can only draft who you can draft. So, I mean, that's.
You know what? It's granted. LA just pointed out THT might be another guy on that list.
THT,
it's early, but he's looked good.
Not all these guys are on there. Like Itzhak Bonga started games for an NBA team, a shitty one last year, but he still started
I mean,
games.
Called us.
And he is a player who is still very young. I mean, he was the youngest guy drafted, I think, that year. And they believe can become like a solid rotation defensive specialist kind of guy if he can learn to shoot a little bit. And like they're good at it. They're just, and so these picks that they give up, this is why Rob Pelinka's job. And I've said a lot that, what's going to make Pelinka's job hard isn't the stuff that he's already done. That's the easy stuff. It's the stuff that comes next. How do you build a team when you don't have a lot of picks, when your inclination is to trade them? And I think, again, they did a good job with the Schroeder trade. That was a smart trade. It's worth giving up the 28th pick to leverage the advantage that you have in the conference right now. I think you do that 1,000 times out of 1,000. But when you have a team that's good at it and you don't, have the ability, it's one of the reasons I was a little surprised, Andy, that they didn't try to buy into the second round. If they don't do it this year, I think they will do it fairly frequently over the next couple seasons.
They have and just not been able to do it.
Right. Sometimes teams won't let you do it, but it will, I think, not be an uncommon thing for them to try to get themselves picks in the second round, because again, they are really good at identifying talent. Let's do this story, because of all of the things that happened in the league today, like we said, the biggest news, Andy, was the Clay news. From a basketball standpoint, some of the what Philly did, like you said, really good work. I think there were a lot of good mutually beneficial trades that have. The most entertaining thing,
yes,
by far, and it's really not even close. It really is legitimately a runaway. So last night with Justin Verrier from The Ringer, you and me and Justin, we talked about the great work that Milwaukee did, and even Sacramento did, in turning an asset of Bogdan Bogdanovic into a player that can help keep Giannis around, help the Kings get an asset in Dante DiVincenzo, who, good, young, defensive-minded player who can help a team like Sacramento on that side of the floor, particularly in a sign-and trade that really seemed to work for everyone except apparently Bogdan Bogdanovic, who nobody asked. Like, are you interested in signing a contract to play with Milwaukee?
Yeah.
Because fundamental, Andy, to the sign and trade is you have to have the guy sign the contract to go play for the team that he's getting traded to.
It is too early to sign a contract, but the beginning stage is, Brian, for all of these.
The part where you agree.
Right. You get the agreement of said player that is going to be signed and traded, and then you work out the rest. And earlier today, Sam Amick, our buddy over at The Athletic, broke the news, and I'm reading his tweet. Sources tell The Athletic that the Bucks Kings sign and trade, which was expected to send restricted free agent Bogdan Bogdanovic, I could do that better, to Milwaukee for
Bogdanovic. It's what? It's not your fault, because people whose first names and last names are the same.
No, what it was, I just ran out of air.
Bogdan.
I needed a breath.
Bogdanovic.
I didn't pace it well. This is one of those times, if I was doing like voiceover work, they just would have said, do it over.
Broadcasting professional.
For DiVincenzo, DJ Wilson, Irsane Ilyasova is in peril, as there was never an agreement from the 28-year-old small forward, that would be Bogdanovic, to join the Bucks, and that element has become a major issue.
Yes. Well, yeah.
High-ranking team official says deal has issues, outcome is unclear.
I feel like Sam gets credit there for understatement.
Well, Sam is much more responsible than you or me.
Well, step one of any sign and trade is, hey, Bogdan, would you go play? Like, is this a place that if they gave you the right amount of money, you'd go play? Now, this could, because the other thing we talked about, and I think we opened the show with this last night. How the hell is anybody doing this anyway? Like, this is arranging a sign and trade ahead of the free agency period And I think it was the trade moratorium lifted at that point. I don't know. But many, many rules were being violated here.
Yes.
And so, like,
I mean, not that doesn't happen all the time.
Not.
I mean,
but it's usually like, and maybe everybody just figured like the NBA, it's like, dude, there's a pandemic. The offseason is 11 minutes long.
No. I was listening to Brian Windhorst on Sports Center with Scott Van Pelt, and I had seen or read stuff like this to this effect, but apparently there were a lot of execs around the league pissed off when this leaked.
Yes.
It just felt like, blatant tampering again, that they all do too. They're all being hypocrites on this, but a lot of them, I'm sure, want to try to keep themselves in the Giannis sweepstakes if possible, that sort of thing. But here, one of two things happened in this, both of which eventually just turn into somebody fucked something up.
Yes.
One of two things. Either they worked all of this out and leaked it before actually going, somebody leaked this. This got out somehow without actually getting the okay from Bogdanovich.
Which would be in the history of trades, probably the most catastrophic fuck up of all time.
Oh, incredibly dumb. I mean, this just would be incredibly stupid. I mean, Windhorst was saying when he was on with Scott Van Pelt, I've covered the NBA for a long time. I've never seen anything like this before.
This is a new one.
It's one of two things. Either like they got all of their ducks in a row, except the first thing you ought to do, which is, hey, Bogdan, how do you feel about this?
Right. They got their ducks in a row, but they started at the end of the row instead of the front of the row.
Right. And leaked it without, somebody let this thing get out without Bogdan being fully on board. Or they just let this thing get out. They hadn't actually gone to Bogdan, but they had talked, about, hey, would you be up for this if Bogdanovich was cool with it? Okay. And they never said the thing about nobody breathe a word of this. Like, don't let this get out. Nobody breathe a word of this. Like, shh. I'm saying,
yes.
Jeannie Buss recently, I don't remember which interview it was, but Jeannie Buss revealed that when she hired Magic and Rob Pelinka, part of the reason that this, or not even part of, the big reason this sucker punched everybody, nobody saw it coming, was she was concerned about the coup that her brothers, Jim and Johnny, correct? We're looking
to... I think it was Jim. Yeah, I think it was Jim and Johnny.
Yeah, Jim and Johnny. Joey's definitely not involved with that.
Yeah, I tell you what, in hindsight, they never should have hired Rudy Giuliani to run that thing.
But, she was concerned about the coup that her brothers were looking to pull. And because of that, she had to not do a formal search and keep this thing completely quiet, that basically Jim and Mitch were getting fired, because otherwise she was worried that those guys would undo it. If you can manage to keep I'm hiring Magic Johnson and Rob Pelinka quiet, you can keep this quiet.
It's one of the, and look, I mean, the deal could end up happening. It's like you said, it's either the most monumental CYA moment in the history of anything, where they're just everybody's trying to backtrack to minimize the amount of fines they get, or, like you said, it's catastrophically stupid on a level that I don't think the NBA has ever seen. Either way, there are going to be ramifications, whether it's, Bogdanovich's people being like, okay, well, if you're only going to give us 16 and a half, let's see if you can squeeze out that extra 7, and maybe let's bump that to 7. Like, someone is going to pay. Who knows?
Maybe this was just Bogdan saying, I think I can get a better deal in the sign and trade, so I'm going to scuttle it. I mean,
maybe it is, or or it's one of these things where he's, or like I said, maybe everybody's got to kind of sort of be like, no, we hate this deal.
But again, you got to have.
It's so terrible. It's very, very poorly done.
I mean, and look, we're being asked by Lando C88, do you still think this trade goes down? It could.
I don't know.
But one of two things. Either this is the most effective CYA we've ever seen, and a lot of really good reporters are getting snowed on this.
No, see, finish your sentence. But I don't think that, but I can push back on that.
Or it's actually in danger.
But see, I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. I don't think anybody's being snowed. I think the deal is in danger because they screwed it up to the point where they now run into this problem of tampering violations, of carts ahead of horses, of all these other things. So the deal is 100% in peril, even if it eventually goes through. It could still happen, but it is
But I mean,
definitely in peril.
Is it in peril, or is it in finger quotes peril?
Because I think it's I think it's a legitimate, like, many things now can go wrong. It is an absolute 100% real risk of the whole thing falling apart. Absolutely. I do not think that the writers on this are being snowed by any stretch of the imagination. But that doesn't mean it might not still happen.
But okay,
it just means, but even if it does happen, it's still one of the most horribly executed sign-in trades in the history of the NBA.
When you say it could fall apart and that it would be in peril and therefore nobody is actually getting snowed, do you mean it could fall apart because the league becomes involved with it to the point where they can't make this thing work out? Or, because if you're really going CYA and with, I guess, trying to avoid what the league might get upset about, then maybe you need to come up with some different machination of this, because if basically what you land on
is... I think all of this, I think it's possible that, another team kind of swoops in the chaos. There's a lot of stuff like this is a, it's already fucked up. So it's like the smooth execution of this sign and trade. And we know how hard it is to pull off trades in the NBA.
Yeah.
Things can always go wrong. Things can always get sideways. And what you think is a pretty simple execution of a deal becomes much more complicated very quickly over stuff that is much smaller than this.
Well,
and so I that's what I mean. Do I know? I don't know anymore. I certainly am not going to pretend that I know more than the people who are actually covering this story around the league. I just think that, it is, those two things that you're talking about are mutually exclusive. And I don't think anybody needs to be snowed or having the proverbial wool pulled over their eyes for this to be something that could either fall apart or still go through. It's obviously in some state of uncertainty, to say the very least.
Well, I mean, here's something though. You and I always say the league at the end of the day cares as much. They care about tampering as much as teams around the league make them care, because the reality is they don't care. They know all of this goes on, and
don't do it in a way that makes us look stupid.
Laker fans always get upset that, the Lakers ended up getting fined in the Paul George fiasco more than most teams around the league ever end up in any type of trouble. And we know that everybody tampers. My response is always, find me the other president of basketball operations that went on Jimmy Kimmel and tampered with the player.
Right.
Like that's, that and some other stuff that was going on. That's why the Lakers got fined. The Lakers, and specifically Magic, but also Rob too, put the league in the position where they had to care.
Yes.
Like they care as much as they are made to care.
That's essentially what this is. And, everyone's working on a compressed timeline. There's the amount of shadiness is higher this year, I'm sure, than most years. And I'm sure the league is willing to at least, like you say, make reasonable accommodations to understanding the DMs have to work very quickly and players have to work very quickly. They don't want to build up ill will with the players, because they got some really touchy negotiations. They managed to get through this one, but in the next CBA that part of the agreement that they had this time was that both sides can walk away from it over the next 2 years. They can each tear it up and start over again. Like, you don't want to be looking like you're petty, where like, oh no, you must wait the extra 2 days to figure out, like 3 days. Like, but again, don't make us look stupid in the process. Don't make us look like our rules don't exist. And that's what this trade did, because the first reaction that everybody had was, wait, what? It's one thing to say these two teams have agreed in principle on a trade. Okay, that can happen even before whatever the dates are. It's another thing to say these two teams have agreed on a trade that involves a player making a choice about free agency a week basically ahead of when you're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not a full week, but close.
Don't make us have to care.
Don't make it's very similar to how you parent. Like, don't children, do not make me have to come upstairs and don't make me turn this car around, Andy.
Right. I don't care that you're fighting. Just don't make me have to.
Don't make me have to do anything about it. Right. Don't get in my way. It is, of course, draft night, and I you and I are not people who pay a lot of attention to college basketball and all that kind of stuff. But I do think we would be remiss if we didn't offer at least a little bit of draft analysis. Anthony Edwards was drafted first by the Minnesota Timberwolves. Looks a lot like Alex Caruso. I was impressed by that. Apparently, he was a military man earlier in his career. Thank you for your service. This reminds me of, do you remember when Ian Anderson started for the Braves in the NLCS? I think it was, NLDS or whatever it was, against the Dodgers.
Sure.
But the pitcher, Ian Anderson.
Yes.
Went on Sports Center with Neil Everett, who we love.
Yeah, he's the best.
Talking about, and this was the night that Ian Anderson was awesome. Completely shut down the Dodgers, did all this stuff. And Neil Everett, who is of that generation, caps it with a Jethro Tull joke, basically saying, it's either like a reference, Ian Anderson, the lead singer of the 60s, 70s band, and they became sort of like minstrel band. I don't know what you call Jethro Tull anymore. And got a reaction from Ian Anderson that was like, yeah, that is about the 942nd time today that I've heard that joke, dude. Like, it was the most unpleasant, uncomfortable moment I've heard on SportsCenter in a long, long time. And so, like, today when I was thinking about Anthony Edwards being drafted, like, the only thing I was like, well, I could make like an ER joke here somewhere. There's no good joke you can make there.
No, we watched you attempt it.
No, but it was mostly to
good.
set up. It was mostly to set up this story.
No,
like,
I know.
That's how little that I have like to say about the analysis.
No, it failed on
all
both
this
counts.
Stuff.
But to your point,
I don't think it was a bad story.
No. I'm just saying.
Do you think
it was a lot of setup?
Yeah,
there was a lot.
It's an untimed show. But do you think, like, clearly Ian Anderson, the pitcher for the Braves, has heard the jokes about Jethro Tull, and to say the least, it's niche-y. Like, I don't know a lot of 23-year-old pitchers who are big fans of Jethro Tull. Do you think this Anthony Edwards gets the ER jokes a lot, or is that show?
Well, no, I don't think he gets. I don't.
Do you think he gets Maverick?
I think he gets
jokes?
Yes, I think he gets Top Gun jokes. I'm guessing he does not get a lot of ER, but Top Gun, I think, is more still in the pop culture zeitgeist. Top Gun 2 is going to be coming out. It was going to be coming out today this year before the pandemic hit. So, it's more, I think, top of mind for a lot of people. It's more of a thing. So my guess is he hears more of that. Mm-hmm. I doubt he gets a ton of ER jokes. I mean, that show's been off the air for
a while. I was thinking it was, but like the Top Gun thing. Honestly, if I was going to make an Anthony Edwards reference, one of the most important Anthony Edwards moments in my life was Gotcha.
Sure.
Just mostly for Linda Fiorentina.
Sure.
That's a different deal.
Yeah, but he has, I'm sure, gotten a lot of Top Gun. I'm sure he's gotten a lot of Goose over the years. I mean, it's been done.
I wonder if he's even seen it.
Top Gun? Probably. Yeah. I mean, it's on cable constantly. I'm guessing he's seen it. I mean, like, it's one of those movies you likely have run across at some point in your life. I don't know how much.
About the other day, where it was one of those things where like the pop culture reference came up, and it was something with someone's IG, and we're just like, there was a 0% chance. It doesn't matter.
I think it was me when James Harden did his IG story a couple days ago.
No, it isn't. But this is a similar. It's the similar thing in reverse.
He put out his IG story that had him unscrewing the cap off a water bottle and people couldn't decide if this meant no cap, like this no cap is slang for no lie.
I
No
did not know
cap.
that.
Right. Well, I had to Google to figure out sort of what was going
The
on with
amount
this
of shit
IG
I got to look
video.
up on Urban Dictionary.
Right. But basically the idea that either he's saying no cap, I won out of Houston, or it's all cap that I even won out of Houston. It's all lies, one or the other. But that was one of those moments, and I even tweeted it out. You really start feeling old when you have to Google to figure out an NBA player's IG story.
I'll do you one better. I couldn't even find the IG story.
I haven't.
I couldn't find it. When you tweeted, I was like, I don't know this IG.
I found
the
it,
IG
but
stuff.
I found it through the Google search.
Did you understand what Twitter did the other day? Like the new thing that do you understand this new Twitter feature that they put in?
No. I mean, to be fair to myself and not age myself too much, I haven't actually explored it or really tried to figure out what it is. I literally
don't even know what it is. I can't even figure.
I believe there is some type of equivalent now on Twitter to stories. You know, like the Instagram stories. There's some type of thing on Twitter that you can do. I think there's a couple features in terms of the way you can present tweets. But beyond that, I haven't explored it.
Doesn't sound terribly important.
I just know people have complained about it, but people complain about everything.
Yeah, as Granted LA says, it's just Instagram stories. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, now we don't have to join Instagram, Andy.
Well, I got it right though. That's what matters.
See, you're pretty clued into what the kids are talking about these days.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. So the Lakers they're relatively quiet today. The Schroeder thing goes down, and now it really becomes about Friday, and what the Lakers are able to do Friday going forward when the free agency period starts, and then obviously leading up into training camp. And a lot of that, Andy, is going to be built around what happens to their own potential guys with player options. And I think the assumption has basically been Kentavious Caldwell-Pope opts out, re-signs for some number, $12 to $15 million a year, whatever, with the Lakers. That's about right. Rajon Rondo opts out, probably now leaves, although it's not guaranteed, but probably leaves in the wake of the Schroeder deal. It's not guaranteed, but
I think it'll be interesting, and a lot of this is speculative just because there are so many moving parts, and to lose Rondo would require the Lakers getting pretty significantly outbid in a way that I wonder if that market is really going to be there for Rondo. Although, I mean, the best case you'd ever make for really overpaying for Rondo is just trying to take that tool away from the Lakers in the playoffs where Rondo really mattered. Like, you just feel like you're hamstringing the Lakers.
Well, it depends a little bit on the team. Like, Atlanta wants him, to sort of be a guy who mentors, for example,
and gets them into the playoffs.
Right. And the Clippers, I think, would want him both because they need that functionality in their offense, and then also to take him away from the Lakers. So it does depend a little bit on the team.
But I also think too, it depends on, for example, Avery Bradley, if he decides to opt out and the Lakers then are and there are more and more reports that Bradley is, if nothing else, heavily weighing opting out, which initially I found quite surprising. But if he ends up opting out and the Lakers don't re-sign him, that could give them a larger mid-level exception to play with.
Right.
And the larger mid-level exception to play with could affect their ability to re-sign Rondo at maybe a larger price. I mean, there's all
Do they not have bird rights on him, or do they have to use their mid-level to do it?
For Rondo?
Do they have to use an exception to re-sign Rondo? I didn't think they did.
I think it's more about like getting into the tax, and also just like the other pieces that you're going to be looking to shore up, how much available money that you have in order to do this.
Right, but the point, what I was getting at, that's sort of what you were talking about here. Like, there are certain assumptions that are made about who's coming back and how that would impact. The assumption is that Bradley would be a guy whose $5 million would be on the books and would get them that much closer, make it harder for them to get to a point where you could use the non-tax mid-level. And then there's JaVale McGee, who everyone assumed was going to opt in for 4 and change because there's just not, you wouldn't think there's that much market for him. Well, today on 710 ESPN, Ramona Shelburne of ESPN was talking to Mason in Ireland, and at least there is some question about all of that stuff now, where even JaVale may, in fact, opt out. Now, on the one hand, it makes it so that would really, if JaVale and Bradley both opt out, the Lakers can really, will be able to use that essentially $10 million exception as opposed to a 5 and change. Drastically changes the kind of a player they can get. I still think, the Bradley stuff, whether it's JaVale, whether it's Bradley, a little bit of this is, we want a little bit of a longer commitment if you give it to me, but also I think fear on their part that the minute that they opt in, they're going to be packaged in some sort of other trade, because that's, kind of all the salary that the Lakers have.
Well,
and
for
they're
example,
trying to leverage that.
I was going to say, for example, if the Lakers were going to try to use Kuzma as the main draw to get an impact player in return, they're going to need salary to balance it out. And the only guy right now that they can count on for that is Quinn Cook in terms of players that you would conceivably think about moving. I mean, obviously, if you get a really big opportunity, someone like Caruso could be on the table. But for the time being, I think he's not right. He's not untouchable, but he's not somebody they're looking to move unless it was absolutely you have to do this. But if all of a sudden you have Avery Bradley available, you have JaVale McGee available with Quinn Cook, with Kyle Kuzma, then you could maybe get a player, I'm guessing about 14 or so million. You start putting yourself in a different position to actually bring in somebody of impact.
Right. If Bradley at 5,
JaVale at 4
and change, JaVale at 4, Kuzma, whatever, and then the whatever it is, the 20% or 15%, you can get up to 16, 17, million. Now, what's funny about this too is, on the one hand, if JaVale wants to opt out, it's okay, you can, maybe go get a better player in the middle of it. You do have to at some point start to replace some of these guys, though. And that's where it gets tricky. Are you better off, if you're the Lakers, if Bradley and McGee stay, and maybe you have you just don't have enough money to go after the big guys, but you have your depth that or are you better off if those guys go, you can take a crack at a better player, but you're going to have to fill in more roster spots, presumably with veterans minimum guys, or chop up that big mid-level to pay 2 or 3 guys anyway? I'm not sure what the answer is to that.
I'm not sure either. I mean, if you had the ability to choose between, I'm just throwing this out. And again, a lot of this is really unknown because we don't know what these guys are all going to be doing, and we don't quite know what the market for them is going to be. But let's just say, as a hypothetical, if you had the ability to choose between Rondo or Bradley, who would you choose?
I'd probably take Rondo.
So would I. I think right now there is more of a need for what Rondo can do on this roster, particularly in the playoffs, however imperfectly and at times with a lack of availability.
Okay, but let's think this through here as I rub my temples.
Very dramatic.
It is. It's a very, very important question. And our opinion is probably what will clinch it in one way or the other. Bradley is a more useful regular season player. And they would need what Bradley does, particularly defensively on the perimeter, more in the regular season than what
I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure about that, because I think the gap in what Schroeder brings as a scorer is larger. The gap that he brings as a scorer versus what Bradley brings is larger than whatever defense you would lose. And with Bradley being gone, but I also think that they're going to need that playmaking from Rondo and the ability to organize again, however imperfectly.
But part of it is too, is who's, it's hard to know what the rotation is. because a lot of that organization, is Schroeder, can do some of that and theoretically take some of the pressure off when LeBron's not on the floor. When LeBron is on the floor, particularly in the regular season, you have the and Bradley. The thing about Bradley is that they proved that they don't need him. I mean, like in the most definitive ways, they proved they can win without Avery Bradley. So, I think you add Schroeder in there. I think KCP likely comes back. I think you have to add now at least one or two more wings to this group. It's a hard question because there's not a lot out there to replace any of these dudes.
Well, I mean, but that actually gets to, though, the larger question of where you would allocate resources, because KCP, we would agree, is the most important of their free agents that they have to retain.
Correct.
Like he is by far the biggest priority, and it's not even close in terms of all the other guys that could potentially lose. But then when you start thinking about allocating resources, they need more help along like the 3-4 type wings than anything else. I mean, whether Bradley stays or go, whether Rondo stays or go, whether, JaVale only really becomes a deal, I guess, if you can't bring back Dwight or Markieff Morris. Like, if you're going to lose all three of them, then potentially it becomes problematic. But I feel like if you can keep one or the other between Dwight and JaVale, you're probably fine. Or particularly if you can keep maybe 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3 between Dwight, JaVale, and Markieff Morris, you've at least got
we're
some type of
We're going to get to Dwight here in a second, because Dwight is not just does he come back or not. The story around Dwight is really interesting and fascinating and supremely Dwightish, and we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, you don't need both. You can get by without Dwight or JaVale. You presumably could use one of the two.
Yeah, presumably one of the two. Or at that point, you really need to make sure you're keeping Markieff. Like, there's some combination of these guys that you need to keep. But outside of KCP, I don't know if any of them really feel like a higher priority than the other individually. Because at the end of the day, where I think the areas the Lakers need to shore up the most, none of them necessarily address. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like they need the most help in sort of small 40 or stretch 4 type guys.
This is what we were
None of
talking
them
about
are
on Sunday. But this is what we were talking about on Sunday with the Schroeder trade. Like, on balance, what they improve and the stuff, because I think they got a little bit lucky and were fortunate in the things that could have burned them, and the deficiencies of the team, which were real, didn't, in part because playoff Rondo was genuinely surprising and probably even a little bit better than they expected, but also KCP kind of stepped up and like they got production. Markieff Morris, who hit like 2 3-pointers in the regular season, and wasn't very good in the play-in games and all that stuff, suddenly in the Houston series became incredible, stopped missing for the rest of the playoffs, and that was it. Like, they got some fortunate breaks that the inability for that secondary shot creation, all that stuff, it didn't come back to haunt them. There's no guarantee it would work the same way the next year. So I think they needed what Schroeder can do, but you have to replace Danny Green on the wing. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you. Those are their big priorities. And beyond that, like you're going to lose a little bit of defense. You're going to lose some other stuff. I don't know if, but if you let those guys go, if they don't come back, you have to replace them too. So,
well, I mean, great.
Every time you prioritize one thing over another, it creates a hole somewhere else. So there is that sort of trailing effect of having to plug a hole.
Yeah.
That you allow to be created, even if the creation of that hole is the right choice.
Yeah, and granted, LA brings up an interesting point. The Lakers need 2 centers on the roster just to make AD happy. And
correct.
There's an element of that beyond keeping him happy, but just when you bring in guys, the guys that you decide to keep, the guys you decide to let go, the new free agents that you could be bringing in, how much of these decisions come down to just purely preserving LeBron and AD, physically throughout the regular season? Like a guy like Dwight, for example, how much do you value his ability to just preserve AD, even though you know you're going to go into the playoffs where a lot of matchups are going to turn him into either a reduced role or
Or
just
he's
a
not going to play
complete
at all.
non-factor.
Yeah. Okay,
But
so
that
let's do
regular
the same. Let's do
season,
the same game with that you did before with Bradley and Rondo. You can only bring back one. Let's assume the money is reasonable with Dwight, and you're not, committing to 4 years, to Dwight Howard. Do you go Dwight Howard or JaVale?
I would go Dwight, just because I think at this stage he's better.
Yeah, I would agree.
To me, though, that's not really the question. The question is, if you can only bring back Dwight or Markieff, who do you bring back? And I would bring back.
I would bring back Markieff.
So would I.
Because I think you can. I think you can find. You're not going to find a center who's as good defensively as Dwight, but I think you can find a rugged, defensive-minded center.
Yeah,
who's not going to score.
Right, Nerlens Noel, defensive-minded, clutch client. You can bring in somebody like him.
Yeah,
and I think Markieff, that versatility. And by the way, he can play some of those big man minutes if you need him to. In a second unit. But I just think that versatility. We saw how much more important he ultimately was in more playoff matchups versus Dwight.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's who I would choose.
So let's talk about Dwight here for a second too, because before we go, and there, great story last year, Andy. I am proud of myself for raising my hand and saying, like, there's no reason you can't make this work. It's really up to Dwight. It's worth taking a shot at. I expected it to work out. It even then worked out better than I thought it was going to do. Without getting into too much of the salary rules about what the Lakers can sign Dwight for, because I do think it's a little bit complex based on the minimum contract he had last year. There's only so much the Lakers can pay him. If somebody else throws much more money at him, Dwight has to choose whether or not he wants to play for the Lakers for less or as much. But I do think there's always, with Dwight, as good of a story as this is, there's always the concern with Dwight that you are going, to snap back into some sense of Dwightness at some point, and that you might want to quit while you're ahead. To that end, a couple things that Ramona talked about today on Wednesday on 710 ESPN in LA. She says, and I'm quoting here as from the aggregators, Dwight Howard is another guy the Lakers have to decide on. I'm told they want to bring him back. They call him 3 times a week just to let him know, hey, we want you. That I feel is incredibly Dwightish. Like the idea that you have to call a guy just every 2 or 3 times a week. Just be like, we want you. We still want you. We still love you. Because Dwight was also quoted on one of I think it's the Basketball News podcast.
Yes,
it was with Etan Thomas, was Alex Kennedy's site.
Yeah,
where he says, I would love to come back and play for the Lakers again. Hopefully this year they give me a contract. That's the biggest thing. I don't want to play for free anymore. This year it was like, okay, I'll do whatever, but I think I've earned a contract. Now, he has earned a contract, but it's not like he was doing the Lakers solid last year.
No. It's one of those things, Brian, where and I actually went and found the clip of him talking just so
me too.
I could watch him, I could, take in his body language, vocal tone, etc. And you could interpret this as him saying, like, look, at minimum, I need a guaranteed deal, which he is right. But I also think that goes without saying at this point. Like, I don't think he's going to have to go through this again with a non-guarantee.
I don't think that's what he's talking about. I don't think he's talking about the difference between last year and this year is my minimum contract is guaranteed versus the one where they could have cut me at Christmas. Because that isn't what he's talking about.
Well, I'm saying there could be that benefit of the doubt offer just because Etan Thomas had brought that up. Mm-hmm. And he did specifically respond to that. So the idea that he is acknowledging, like, hey, at minimum, I'd love to show up for a deal that's actually guaranteed. That being said, though, at this point, that feels kind of like an unspoken obviousness. So you do wonder, just the perspective, does White still have this? Because, look, he had a great season and he did everything that was asked of him. But as you pointed out, this was the only option that he had last year. And, if DeMarcus Cousins doesn't get hurt, there's at least a decent chance Dwight wouldn't have been in the league at all. And the Lakers were the only team willing to take a chance on him. And the reason Dwight was in that position was largely, if not solely, his own doing.
Correct.
Maybe beyond whatever degree you factor in health questions. And I'm not saying that he owes the Lakers for having taken a chance on him, because he doesn't. I want to make that really clear. He does not owe them a thing. He fulfilled his end of the deal. But you do wonder, just with Dwight, and maybe this is unfair to him, but because there have been patterns of this in the past, is he losing some degree of perspective? We'll see. He said that he wants to stay here. His wife, I didn't realize he was married, but his wife plays for the Sparks. So he'd love to be.
I did not know that.
That was news to me. I had no idea. Congratulations.
I did not know that.
So
look that up.
Yeah, I didn't know either. But he said that obviously they'd like
he's
to be
engaged. Or is that
he described her as his wife in this thing.
Maybe it's an old headline.
But either way, she's on the
his
Sparks.
wife. Yeah, it's his wife. Okay.
I had no idea. But I'm not saying I'm going to be monitoring Dwight for his humility, because that's bullshit, and that that's stuff that I don't want to get involved
it's performative,
with.
Because Dwight either is convincing or he's not convincing. It's like,
right.
We're basically grading on whether or not Dwight's a good actor.
Right. And I don't want to get into that. But it was just interesting to hear him phrase it that way. That's all.
So much of this, though, what's funny about Dwight is that so much of this is kind of out of the Lakers' hands and becomes a thing for him to have to decide about how much does he want to get paid. Like if somebody offers him 2 years and $10 million, I'm pretty sure, again, I'm not a salary cap expert, but I'm pretty sure the Lakers can't get close to that. They can
if
probably
he wants
give him
the
about
money,
half of it.
Godspeed, man.
I would never ever criticize somebody for taking the money. Like I don't know what his financial situation is, particularly since the chances of a bad team wanting, like, if it's going to be the Clippers, it'll be the Warriors, it'll be some team that's competitive that needs him for a specific reason. Because no rebuilding team needs to spend $10 million on Dwight Howard.
No,
even after what he did last year, because whereas Atlanta can look at Rajon Rondo and say, like, this guy can help our young guards learn the game.
I don't remember which one it was, but a kid that got drafted tonight was like almost in tears talking about the way Rondo took him under his wing.
It was the kid from Kentucky.
Yeah.
And I'm not, like, if you want to sit down, like Dwight Howard, I'm sure can explain NBA defense to you in any number of ways, because the guy is one of the greatest defenders of this and any other generation. He's not seen as a mentor, I think, around the league. Would you agree with that?
Not as traditionally defined, no.
So a bad team isn't going to bring him in for that. So, and particularly, given the limitations of positionally.
Taking this full circle, and this just hit me, but we were talking about the impact of the Klay Thompson injury for the Lakers, or for the Warriors, and for, by extension, the rest of the league. One of the teams that had been rumored to be really interested in Dwight and that the Lakers maybe could lose him to was the Warriors, that he could end up going to Golden State. But depending on what the situation is with Klay and what they even know come the beginning of free agency, what does that do with Dwight's suitors?
There's the Klay thing throws so many things into so much disarray in the West. I just feel terrible. It's so crappy. It's just genuinely crappy. It would be like if Luka Doncic gets hurt or something, Porzingis hopefully heals up before. Like, I realize, everybody wants the Lakers to, certainly everybody listening to this podcast more or less wants the Lakers to repeat. I don't think there's any mystery there, but you don't want to do it because 2 or 3 teams, were broken. Like, that's not how this would work. And I'm a basketball fan, so I want this to be good. All right. So Well, we'll be back. What, Sunday? We're going to do this one
We'll-
again on Sunday.
Yeah, we'll be recording the night that free agency kicks off, and that show will be live on Mondays. As always, you can find it at the Believe Network or
Right.
anywhere
Well,
else.
so we have two things going on. This is why I paused. So the
Okay.
late night happy hour, which this is, and people need
Yes.
to, a
Okay.
reminder that this is the late night happy hour. We will be back tomorrow. Lindsay Theory doing some NFL and the Rams. The Rams got the COVID, Andy. So we got to figure out what's going on there ahead of the Monday night game. Friday night, Mo DeKeel. That is the opening of free agency. We'll do that on the late night happy hour, and then Sunday we'll come back with another episode of the Lando Lakers podcast on the Believe Network, sponsored by BetOnline.ag and the fine folks at Delicious Pizza, where you can get 20% off by telling them the Kamenetsky brothers, the Cam brothers sent you, whether you order online or you phone in your order to either location, West Adams or Sunset.
Yep.
I did, because now that I think we got everything, right?
Yes, we did. All the housekeeping's out of the way.
Very good. Well, so we'll see everybody tomorrow night for the late night happy hour, 10 o'clock p.m. Pacific, and the next Lando Lakers podcast on Sunday.
Yep.
Into Monday. Thanks a lot, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.